Thank you for listening. This course was created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional podcasts, books, newsletters, and cool merchandise await. Let's get started. Third-party risk is the exposure your organization assumes when it relies on external partners for technology, services, or data. In AI programs, that exposure expands because models, prompts, datasets, and tool integrations frequently come from outside your direct control. When you integrate an external inference API, entrust training to a cloud platform, or use a vendor's labeling workforce, you inherit their security posture, good and bad. Dependencies can introduce vulnerabilities you did not design: opaque logging, weak key management, permissive defaults, or delayed patching. Think of third-party risk as a network of shared fates. A flaw upstream or a misstep by a service provider can ripple into outages, breaches, or regulatory problems for you. Defining the scope clearly: who counts as a third party, what systems they touch, and which data they process, turns a vague concern into a manageable, measurable program. Vendors in AI fall into several practical categories that shape your controls. Cloud service providers host compute, storage, and networking for training and inference, so their isolation, logging, and identity models become your baseline. Pre-trained model providers supply weights or APIs. Their training data provenance, safety evaluations, and update cadence affect your risk. Dataset vendors deliver corpora and labels, raising questions about licensing, privacy, and bias. Plugin and connector developers extend agents into email, documents, finance systems, or code repositories. Their permissions and audit trails determine how safely tools are invoked. Each category touches different assets and failure modes. Classifying vendors this way helps you tailor questionnaires, contractual clauses, and monitoring to what actually matters. No generic survey can substitute for controls aligned to the kind of power a vendor holds inside your AI pipeline. Supply chain overlap means you rarely consume a vendor in isolation. You import their artifacts and their dependencies. A base container image, a Python library, a prompt template pack, or a model checkpoint can each carry inherited vulnerabilities, outdated packages, poisoned data shards, or subtle license conflicts. Shared accountability follows. If a vendor's SDK silently disables logging or a connector requests broad scopes, your environment's attack surface grows even though your code never changed. Extended attack surfaces also arise when vendors rely on subcontractors for annotation, red team services, or content delivery, multiplying paths for leakage or compromise. Treat artifacts as you would code. Verify signatures, scan for known issues, track provenance, and rehearse rollback. Make suppliers disclose their own supply chains so you can see past the first hop and decide whether that extended web of trust meets your standards. Contracts are where expectations become enforceable. Security clauses should specify baseline controls encryption, access management, logging, vulnerability management, and require timely patching. Audit rights let you review evidence, request remediation, and, when needed, perform or commission independent assessments without breaking service. Incident reporting obligations must define severity thresholds, notification timelines, information to be shared, and cooperation during forensics. Liability provisions allocate who pays when harms occur, including caps, exclusions, and indemnities for intellectual property or data protection breaches. Add subprocessor disclosure, change control notice, and exit assistance so you can see who else touches your data, veto risky shifts, and depart cleanly with your logs and models intact. Clear, specific language avoids debate under pressure. In a crisis, you want a playbook baked into the contract, not a philosophical argument about what reasonable security means. Assessing vendor security starts before signature and matures after. Questionnaires are useful triage, but answers must be anchored in evidence. Policy documents, architecture diagrams, data flow maps, and control matrices that show how requirements are met. Third-party certifications, such as SOC 2, ISO 27001, or sector-specific attestations, signal discipline, but are not substitutes for scope-accurate proof. Ask for recent penetration test summaries, remediation status, and vulnerability metrics relevant to the services you will actually use. Validate logging schemas, retention, and export paths so you can investigate incidents without vendor gatekeeping. Where AI is the product, request evaluation reports, red team results, and fine-tuning safeguards that limit memorization or leakage. The goal is to replace trust us with testable artifacts and to document residual risks explicitly so your governance body can accept or decline them with eyes open. Ongoing monitoring keeps the picture current as vendors evolve. Continuous risk scoring blends external signal security ratings, breach reports, leak trackers, with internal telemetry about how the integration behaves in your environment. Threat intelligence helps you spot campaigns targeting your sector or specific platforms you depend on. Anomaly detection across vendor activity, unexpected API calls, scope expansions, token surges, or unusual data flows can surface misuse or compromise early. Establish review cadences tied to triggers, major version changes, scope increases, new subprocessors, adverse findings, or missed service level objectives. Close each review with actions. Tighten permissions, rotate keys, request fixes, or if necessary, suspend the integration. Monitoring is not about catching every flaw yourself. It is about ensuring that changes are visible, decisions are documented, and corrective levers are ready when the vendor's risk profile shifts. Vendor access risks arise when convenience outruns control. Overprivileged accounts give integrations more reach than they need, turning a single API key into a skeleton key for data exfiltration or model abuse. Insecure API patterns, long-lived tokens, missing mutual transport layer security, permissive cross-origin settings magnify the blast radius if credentials leak. Shared credentials blur accountability. When the vendor logs in with a team email, you cannot prove who did what or revoke access selectively. The absence of monitoring seals the problem. No one notices odd scopes, unusual request shapes, or bursts of token usage. Counter this with scoped, rotating keys, fine-grained roles, just-in-time access, and mandatory audit logging wired into your case management. Require vendor-side controls, strong customer authentication, device binding, and least privileged service accounts, and validate them with evidence. Access is power. Unmeasured power is risk you have chosen not to see. Data handling risks concentrate where definitions are fuzzy. Uncontrolled sharing occurs when vendors replicate datasets for testing, analytics, or subcontractors without explicit approval or masking, quietly multiplying exposure. Unclear ownership leaves no one responsible for deletion, correction, or honoring data subject rights when records flow into training corpora or logs. Cross-border exposure appears when backups, telemetry, or support snapshots move to regions with different legal regimes, creating obligations you did not plan for. Inadequate deletion is common. Vendors purge primaries but forget caches, derived features, or model snapshots that still encode sensitive patterns. Make expectations concrete in a data processing addendum, purpose limits, residency and transfer bases, retention schedules, deletion service level agreements, certificates of destruction, and attestations that retraining sets and embeddings are scrubbed. Pair policy with verification sample deletes, trace records through pipelines, and test restoration paths to ensure words match reality. Service dependency risks are the fragility of concentration. Single vendor reliance turns business continuity into a referendum on one roadmap, one incident response, and one balance sheet. Vendor outages propagate when your orchestration, logging, and support channels also depend on that same platform, converting a local failure into a portfolio-wide freeze. Supply chain bottlenecks appear when specialized hardware, annotation crews, or regional hosting capacity choke during spikes, delaying training or deployment. Hidden subcontractors widen the blast radius and the disclosure burden when a breach occurs. Design for graceful degradation. Dual paths for critical inference, periodic export of prompts, datasets and checkpoints, and egress clauses that guarantee timely handoff of artifacts. Run dependency fire drills and chaos tests that simulate vendor brownouts. Ask for business continuity, evidence recovery time objective, recovery point objective, failover architecture, and verify that your integrations can ride those rails without manual heroics. Governance integration keeps third-party risk from living in a spreadsheet. Establish a cross-functional committee that includes security, privacy, legal, procurement, finance, and the product owners who feel the impact day to day. Map vendors to policy controls and risk tiers, recording exceptions with owners, mitigations, and expiration dates so waivers do not become forever. Define crisp escalation procedures. What severity triggers suspension, who notifies customers, when regulators are contacted, and rehearse them. Require accountability documentation, data flow diagrams, access matrices, logging schemas, impact assessments, and incident runbooks kept current and discoverable. Feed all of this into a living risk register linked to contracts and technical inventories, so anyone can trace from a finding to the clause and the control that addresses it. Governance is not bureaucracy. It is the muscle memory that aligns decisions under pressure with commitments on paper. Metrics turn vendor risk from opinion to management signal. Track the number of vendors assessed against your baseline and the percentage classified as high risk, segmented by business unit and data sensitivity. Measure remediation timeframes for findings and exceptions, not just whether a report exists. Velocity shows whether the program changes reality. Monitor incident frequency and severity tied to third-party causes, along with mean times to detect, contain, and recover when a vendor is involved. Add coverage measures, share of integrations with least privilege scopes, percentage using short-lived tokens, proportion with exportable logs, and effectiveness measures such as how often monitoring caught anomalies before harm. Present trends and deltas, not just snapshots, and tie metrics to decisions. Budget for remediation, gating in procurement, and renewal terms. A metric that does not alter contracts or configurations is decoration, not governance. Strategic importance is the reason this effort deserves leadership attention. Resilience across the ecosystem means your services bend rather than break when a provider stumbles. Because you built portability, visibility, and practiced response into the design. Trust in vendor services grows when partners know you verify, and customers see that integrations meet a consistent bar for security and privacy. Compliance assurance improves as evidence contracts, logs, assessments, becomes a routine byproduct of operation rather than a scramble before audits. Above all, disciplined third-party risk management protects enterprise AI. Models are trained on lawful data, prompts and tools run with least privilege, and supply chain shocks do not derail critical workflows. You cannot outsource accountability, but you can share it wisely and prove that you have. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Scaling a vendor risk program requires treating it like a product with backlogs, releases, and telemetry. Automate intake so every purchase request spawns a risk record with the vendor's category, data types, scopes, and regions. Tie approvals to risk tier. Low-risk tools flow through a light path, while providers touching production data face full assessments and security reviews. Build a centralized registry that links contracts, subprocessors, technical integrations, owners, and renewal dates, and expose it to finance and procurement so spend and risk move together. Replace annual questionnaires with event-driven checks triggered by version changes, scope expansions, incidents, or missed service levels. Publish standard control profiles for each category cloud host, model provider, dataset vendor so expectations are consistent and auditable. Finally, invest in portability. Routine exports of prompts, datasets, and checkpoints, plus pre-negotiated exit plans make vendor changes survivable rather than traumatic. Tools amplify coverage when teams are small and ecosystems are large. Third-party risk platforms track assessments, findings, and evidence, turning scattered documents into a shared source of truth. Continuous monitoring services watch for breaches, leaked credentials, and configuration drift in public signals, while contract management systems surface clauses on notification, liability, and sub-processors at the moment you need them. Security rating feeds can be useful triage but should be corroborated with vendor-supplied artifacts, not treated as verdicts. Integrate everything with case management and identity systems so anomaly spikes in token usage. New scopes granted. Failed webhooks open tickets automatically. Prefer tools that export machine-readable data. Auditors, customers, and regulators will ask for proof packages you can compile quickly. Adopt a no-orphan evidence rule. Every claim in a vendor's response links to a document, a diagram, or a log you can verify. Sector specifics reshape what good looks like for vendors. In healthcare, partners must handle protected health information with strict consent, access logging, and rapid breach notification, and decision support tools require validation against clinical standards. Financial services providers face model risk management expectations, transparent assumptions, challenger testing, and human oversight for high-value transactions, along with retention and surveillance rules. Education technology vendors encounter constraints on minors, data, parental rights, and profiling limits that affect analytics and personalization. Government contractors operate under procurement rules, transparency to the public, and impact assessments for systems affecting eligibility or rights. These differences are not footnotes. They determine evidence depth, review speed, and acceptable architectures. Translate them into vendor playbooks with required artifacts and red lines so evaluators know what to ask for, and product teams understand where flexibility ends. Legal and compliance links convert vendor controls into enforceable obligations. Map each contract to applicable laws, privacy regimes for data processing, sector statutes for record-keeping, export controls for cross-border transfers, and transparency rules for synthetic content. Embed data processing terms that specify lawful basis, purpose limits, retention, deletion service levels, and permitted sub-processors, and require attestation that training sets and embeddings respect licensing and opt-outs. Define audit reporting obligations, what triggers notification, how quickly, what evidence must be shared, and how cooperation proceeds during forensics. Add enforcement mechanisms, cure periods, escalation paths, and the right to suspend integrations when material controls fail. Keep these mappings current in your registry so when a regulation changes, you can find affected vendors and initiate amendments. Contracts are not paperwork. They are the levers you pull when risk materializes. Vendor management faces structural challenges that won't disappear with a new form. Transparency is limited when startups protect roadmaps or larger providers restrict architecture details to preserve multi-tenancy security. Ecosystems fragment. One solution hides 5 sub-processors, each with different standards and jurisdictions. Oversight is expensive engineer hours for reviews, duplicated tests across business units, and the opportunity cost of slower procurement. Meanwhile, the landscape shifts quickly. Providers pivot products, change pricing, or deprecate features that your workflows depend on. Counter these realities with prioritization and modularity. Focus deepest scrutiny on the integrations with the most power and data. Architect wrappers and brokers so you can swap providers with limited code change. Maintain realistic service-level expectations for assessments and refuse to pretend that a thin questionnaire equals assurance. Clear scope beats false precision. Strengthening the ecosystem is a shared project. Industry-wide assessment templates reduce repetitive burden and drive comparability, while vendor certification programs create portable assurances that procurement teams can trust. Consortium-led standards covering logging schemas, incident fields, provenance manifests, and watermark labeling let platforms and enterprises automate verification rather than argue formats. Encourage vendors to publish trust packages, model cards, data provenance summaries, evaluation reports, red team results, and recovery objectives in a consistent bundle. Participate in cross-sector collaboration to share indicators, playbooks, and lessons learned from vendor incidents, improving everyone's time to detect and contain. Ask for software bills of materials not only for code but for models and datasets, listing dependencies and licenses. Each shared artifact reduces friction, shortens reviews, and raises the floor for acceptable practice-making partnerships safer without smothering innovation. An effective conclusion is an operating model you can run tomorrow. Start by naming owners. Procurement initiates intake and contract hygiene. Security and privacy define baselines and verify evidence. Product teams own least privilege scopes and portability. Legal steers obligations and escalation. Finance links spend to risk. Wrap these roles in a cadence: intake, assessment, approval, onboarding, monitoring, renewal, and offboarding, so vendors move through predictable gates. Keep a single source of truth that binds the registry, contracts, subprocessors, technical integrations, and incidents, with dashboards that expose coverage and gaps. Finally, set review triggers, version changes, scope expansions, adverse findings, missed service levels, and new jurisdictions. When the operating model is visible and repeatable, vendor risk stops being episodic firefighting and becomes logistics disciplined, measurable, and improvable with each pass through the loop. Response and remediation deserve their own playbooks because third-party incidents unfold differently. Containment may begin outside your perimeter. Revoke tokens, reduce scopes, flip traffic to backup providers, and quarantine affected workflows. Require the vendor to preserve artifacts logs, configuration diffs, and forensics images, and mirror that discipline on your side. Invoke contractual cooperation clauses for joint investigations and parallel notifications to customers or regulators, aligning timelines and statements. Track compensating controls as tasks with owners and deadlines. Additional monitoring, temporary restrictions, or manual approvals for sensitive flows. Close with a post-incident review that assigns fixes, updates questionnaires and contracts, and if needed, adjusts risk tier or exits the relationship. The outcome you want is muscle memory. Swift, auditable action that protects users while preserving the evidence and partnerships needed to learn and recover. Procurement and finance are powerful levers for security if you tune incentives. Use tiered requirements and pricing guardrails. Stronger discounts for meeting higher evidence bars, credits for missed service levels tied to security, and penalties for late notifications or undisclosed sub-processors. Negotiate portability terms, upfront export formats for prompts, datasets and checkpoints, assisted transition windows, and escrow for critical artifacts, so resilience is baked into the economics. Budget for redundancy where concentration risk is high, and account for the hidden cost of switching so architecture plans are realistic. Ask vendors to publish security roadmaps, then align renewals and spend with measurable progress. When money moves with maturity, providers invest where it matters. When it does not, promises outpace practice, and your exposure persists. Data discipline is where governance meets engineering. Establish data contracts that specify allowed uses, retention, residency, and deletion timing for every category of information a vendor touches: training corpora, telemetry, prompts, embeddings, and user artifacts. Require lineage, who contributed which records under what basis, and how those records propagate into features, fine-tunes, or logs. Validate with sampling and trace tests so contracts are more than words on paper. Tie contracts to controls you can observe, masking in lower environments, privacy filters before export, redaction in logs, and attested scrubs of retraining sets. When semantics, law, and telemetry line up, you can answer hard questions from auditors and users without a scramble: where the data came from, where it went, and how it left cleanly. Plan your exits before you need them. Run portability drills that rebuild critical workloads on an alternate provider using the latest exported prompts, datasets, and checkpoints. Measure how long it takes, what breaks, and which clauses you relied on. Test read-only modes and degraded service paths to survive vendor brownouts. Keep a roster of qualified alternates and pre-negotiated terms for rapid onboarding under pressure. Document the decision criteria for suspension or termination security failures, transparency gaps, chronic SLO misses, and the communication plan for customers and regulators. Exits are not admissions of failure. They are the proof that accountability sits with you, not with a logo on someone else's login page. Organizations that rehearse departures are the ones that negotiate better terms and sleep better through someone else's incident. Third-party and vendor risk is the architecture of trust beyond your walls. We defined the exposure created by external partners, mapped vendor categories across cloud, models, data, and connectors, and traced supply chain overlap that imports vulnerabilities and obligations. We turned expectations into contracts, security clauses, audit rights, incident reporting, and liability, and replaced assurances with evidence through assessments, certifications, and testing. We sustained assurance with continuous monitoring, least privilege access, disciplined data handling, and resilience against outages and hidden subprocessors. We scaled with automation, registries and tools, adapted for sectors and laws, faced challenges in transparency and cost, and strengthened practice through shared assessments and standards. Carry this operating model forward: metrics that change decisions, playbooks that run under stress, and exits you can execute. Next, we'll translate these controls into enterprise architecture patterns that build portability and safety into the system from the start. Thanks for tuning in to Bare Metal Cyber, your trusted source for cybersecurity educational materials, news, and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.